From cancer scared to Jones in the air, this is Marvin Thomas, and this is my story. Hello, my name is Marvin C. Thomas. C is for Charles. Not very many people know me by my middle name, but I'll let it out now. Michael Reese Hospital, 1958, son of Lucille and Clifton Thomas. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, right on the corner of 70th and Parnell, 7056 to be exact. Parents, Lucille and Clifton Thomas, and I was number 9 in a family of 10 kids that they raised back in the day. I have 7 sisters and 2 brothers, and I am number 9 in the bunch. The baby of the bunch, yeah. I attended, the high school that I attended was Dunbar Vocational, Dunbar Mighty Man to be exact, as we like to call it. Class of 1976. High school, I learned quite a bit in high school just from observing. I was a quiet kid, very quiet kid. And like I like to tell people, I was so quiet that I very seldom even talk to myself. You know. Stay to myself, but at the same time, I was always around other people because of the band. I love the band, the Dunbar Mighty Man, marching band, jazz band, orchestra, string orchestra, and all. And that's where I kind of learned to release my innermost, I want to say talents, but at the time, many people may not have looked at it as a talent. I was a percussionist, and I really learned a lot just from watching others, listening to others. I was mostly a tim-tom percussionist, so I mostly tend to play drums that were multifaceted types of drums. I would have 3 drums or so that I would tend to play, either that or I was on snare or bass or tom-toms, whatever we needed for whatever songs. During the orchestra, I sometimes played the timpani drums, which are large, what they used to call kettle drums. I was in band for all 4 years that I attended Dunbar High School, and I loved every minute of it. Whether it was string orchestra, I learned to actually play an instrument called a viola or viola because the violin was too small for my hand. The neck was too short. So I went for the longer neck instrument, and I really enjoyed playing that instrument. Actually, all of them quite a bit. After high school, there were a lot of options opened up. I did look into the military. But in the back of my mind, even through all of the years in high school, in the band, playing instruments, it was always in the back of my mind to get into aviation. I loved airplanes from the time my parents and I went on a flight. I got on an old airplane and we flew to Fresno, California. So it was always in the back of my mind from that flight that I loved the fact that a man created something that you can actually board, put people inside of, and fly from one location to another. And just time was nothing when I thought about how quickly that thing could travel so many miles. So after high school, I looked into the military, but because of my vision, I found out that I could not qualify for a pilot's position. Yeah, because of my vision, I have astigmatism in one eye, which because of that, I knew that they would not allow me to fly. So after high school, I was determined to get into aviation. So even despite of the fact that I had a music scholarship to attend colleges, I had quite a few colleges that I had in mind, Grambling being one of them. Sometimes, I don't really regret the thought, but Grambling was one of them that was high on the list of colleges to attend. After high school, after graduation and all from Dunbar High School, I attended a local community college for aviation. I wanted to study aviation and anything and everything involved with aviation. My parents and my siblings kind of wanted me to attend a university, but I wanted to be close to home. So I attended Daly College, which at that time was called, it was named Southwest College. So I attended Southwest College here in Chicago, Illinois, just so that I could attend flight training and transportation training, and eventually started my flight training out of Midway Airport right in Chicago, Illinois. The program, in order for me to get my pilot's license, lasted a few years because I wanted to get as much extensive training and pick up as much as I could with anything and everything that had to deal with aviation that I could. So I studied meteorology, aircraft structures, and whatever else I could find that they could, assist me in a career, possibly in aviation. After I got my pilot's license, things kind of took off in a different direction because I started meeting more people that were professional pilots, corporate pilots, and local pilots, and more interestingly to myself was that most of them were African American. And I was introduced to quite a few businessmen at the Gary Airport, where I was introduced to these guys, and they kind of took me under their wing. And I started flying around with these guys, and I had more fun than I probably should have, because it kind of threw me off track from my main goal. I was flying with these guys and flying their airplanes, and to the point where I was like, well, why should I look for a job flying an airliner? I'm having fun flying these airplanes with these guys. And I ended up doing that for quite a few years, flying with pretty prominent Chicago, Illinois business owners. One that always will have a place in my heart was C.F. Moore of C.F. Moore Construction Company here in Chicago. He really took me under his wing and introduced me to some of his associates, and it really led me to a different understanding about some of the things that I need to do within my life as far as preparation for the future, because these guys were, to me, just kings and giants. Flight school was one of the best things that I had ever done in my entire life. Getting into an airplane, walking around airplanes and smelling airplanes, and the people that flew airplanes, the instructors. And there were quotes that to this day, I'll never forget, that helps me throughout my everyday activities. One of the more interesting lines that one of my instructors, Gene Edmonds, one of the greatest flight instructors I think there ever would have been through any of these schools. He once, during a pre-flight inspection of an airplane, looked at me and he said, "Son, the best way to pre-flight your airplane is to look at this airplane and ask yourself, what is it about this airplane and this flight that you're about to take is going to kill you today?" And that hit me in such a way that it really hit home as to the severity of anything and everything that you do, whether it's driving a car, flying an airplane, anything and everything. So these days, as a professional truck driver, every day that I approach that truck, I hear those same lines in my head, only pertaining to a truck, being the difference. When I approach that truck, I ask myself, what is it about this truck and this run that I'm about to make that could possibly kill me? And it makes me look at that entire rig in a totally different light, from one end to the other. And it makes you open your eyes to any possibilities, whether it's the equipment, the road, the conditions, the destination, the journey, it all comes together in a much more severe way. And I think it's one of the the biggest gift that I could have gotten from any of my instructors, that one line. As a private pilot, I tend to fly pretty much locally because just being in the airplane and taking friends flying and all during the day, during the night, I got most of my time just locally. I would jump in an airplane and of course I would have a flight plan, have different locations in mind depending on my time. I would just take off and search for airports and search for restaurants and search for different flying activities and different events that were going on. So I'd jump in an airplane and I'd fly over to Champaign, Illinois, somewhere local. I tell you what, one interesting location that I used to love to fly to every Memorial Day for years. Myself and a lot of my associates, we jump in airplanes and we fly to Tuskegee, Alabama, where at Tuskegee, Alabama, we go to the Tuskegee Institute, where they have a memorial for the Tuskegee Airmen, where I got a chance to meet quite a few of them there, and that was one of the highlights of the year as far as flying events, to go to the one and only place that you could put that type of history together, the Tuskegee Airmen at the Tuskegee Institute. And it was a fun occasion where we would, have different flying events. We'd have performance events. We'd have precision flying events, and it was one of the biggest things that we could do for the year was to fly to Tuskegee, Alabama. Well, I tell you, airplanes are, I want to say, almost like women. They may all look similar, but they're all a little bit different. They all have their own positive and negative attributes, I guess you could say, and different idiosyncrasies. But I started flying in a Cessna 172, a little single engine, high wing. High wing is when the wing is sitting above the location, the cabin or the cockpit where the pilots sit. And I flew those airplanes. That was one of the first airplanes that I ever flown, was a Cessna 172. And I would move along different airplanes just to try them out. One of my favorite training airplanes, even to this day, I love this little airplane. I've actually built model airplanes of it just to have, and that's the Piper Tomahawk. They used to call it the Traumahawk. It gathered this bad rap from people that I guess maybe didn't really understand the airplane. And I flew that airplane, and I touched every bit of what we call the performance envelopes in that airplane, and I never had a bad experience with that airplane. If I could get my hands on one of those airplanes today, I would definitely have a Piper Tomahawk. It wasn't the fastest airplane, the Piper Tomahawk, mainly because it was designed as a trainer, and the airplane being a trainer, the most speed I could ever get out of a Tomahawk was maybe about 105 miles an hour, 105 knots or so, and which was fine with me, because to me, the slower it went, that means that I would just have that much more fun and more time flying the airplane, getting from point A to point B. The fastest one, I would say maybe the fastest airplane that I had the opportunity to fly was a twin-engine Cessna 421 Golden Eagle, which is it's considered a high-performance corporate type of an airplane. As far as close calls and scary incidents, and I've had several different incidents. One of the more memorable ones was actually on the ground one night. After hours, evening, I was flying a Piper Tomahawk into Midway Airport, and I actually had a tire, one of the main landing gear tires, to blow out on me on the runway on the rollout. There were times where I was flying along and was hit by severe turbulence that was totally unexpected. We call it CAT, or clear air turbulence for short, or CAT, and that'll really wake you up. Another close call I had while I was still a student pilot. One day I was going out for a training flight with my instructor, which turned out to be one of my best friends of all times, Jerry Hurd, my most favorite flight instructor. We were all prepared to go out for a training mission, and we were going to jump in my favorite Piper Tomahawk. But the FBO that I was renting aircraft from, they needed to have a 4-seated airplane transported from Midway Airport over to a local field where he had another fixed base operation where he rented aircraft called Ron Station's Midway Piper. So they said, well, for the same price as a Piper Tomahawk, we're going to let you take a larger airplane, a 4-seated airplane, for your training missions. Only trade-off is that we'll have to fly with you. Ron Station owner, he's going to take the back seat, my instructor, and then myself. Okay, so we jumped in this larger airplane than a Piper Tomahawk, which was a Piper Arrow, or Piper Warrior, which was another one of my favorite airplanes. We got in the Warrior. Now this is three pretty nice sized guys. We're in this single engine airplane. It was a hot day, and they did the quick pre-flight on the airplane, which I found out I never let anybody else from that point do a pre-flight, no matter who it was. They did a quick pre-flight on the aircraft. We got in the airplane and we took off, running down runway 4 at Midway Airport. And for some reason, the airplane didn't want to leave the ground. The airplane rolls seemed like forever before it finally broke ground, and we barely cleared buildings at the far end of the runway. And we found out right before making contact with that building that in the airplane there's an ignition switch that once triggered, it would allow all of the spark plugs in the engine, which had 2 per cylinder, to fire to get the maximum performance out of the airplane. Well, accidentally, that ignition switch was not in the right location to have maximum performance out of this engine. And we discovered that at the last second, and we switched that ignition switch, and the airplane just barely cleared a building at the end, an apartment building. I felt as though I could reach out and touch the roof of that building as we went over it. We cleared it by I don't think 20 feet. That was pretty scary, that one. I had one other incident where I was flying a Piper Tomahawk over to the Aurora Airport to pick up another pilot. Actually, it was my instructor, my flight instructor pilot, Jerry Hurd. He had flown a much faster airplane to this location to drop off for repair, and I was supposed to met him there for a pickup. Well, little did I know that there was a storm coming in, and just as I was about to touch or reach the threshold of the airport, the airplane was hit by a gust of wind, a crosswind, and it rolled my airplane almost to a 90-degree angle to the runway. And the funny thing that hit me at that moment was that this looks like one of those angles that I fly with my model airplanes, and I knew from flying the model airplanes what to do with this real airplane in order to keep from putting this airplane in the ground at the threshold of the runway. So I implemented the correct controls, and I was able to squeak that airplane in on the runway to find out that several airplanes before my landing in there turned away from the airport because they couldn't land their airplanes because of the winds. But as a student pilot, fresh out of solo flight, I was able to get that airplane in there just from learning different maneuvers flying model airplanes. So I was able to put that together, and after I got on the ground and finished shaking around a little bit, it was kind of a funny thing that I flew my real airplane like a model airplane and was able to save myself. Later on in life, thinking that everything was going fine with me. I was always a healthy guy. You know, I was into different physical activities, and I always thought I was in the greatest shape. I always ate well and stayed away from drinking and smoking. I had a guy to come by the house one day looking for some additional life insurance, and thinking that I was in good shape, always making my doctor's appointments and my yearly exams and all. I was rejected for life insurance, and I contacted the company to ask them, well, what was the issue with the rejection? They said, well, your PSA levels were not within their guidelines for approval, and that I should see my primary about it. Okay, well, I made the appointment, went in to see my primary. He set me up with Dr. Ike Ochoa, and they diagnosed me after a little while with prostate cancer. Okay, before I was diagnosed with cancer, prostate cancer specifically, I had very little, if any, type of symptoms at all that I know of that would have led me to think that there was a problem. And like I said, it wasn't until I had been rejected by an insurance company that I found out that my PSA levels were off the scale and that I needed to have it looked at. My primary physician set me up with a doctor, Dr. Ike. He performed a biopsy, which determined that my prostate gland was more than 50% cancerous, and that I would definitely need some type of treatment right away. My chances of survival were stated as being no more than 5 years if nothing was done about it. It was a pretty rough time, even with the biopsy. 3 or 4 days after the biopsy, I started to develop clots in my bloodstream, and I actually almost had accidents because of that. After the biopsy, I actually encountered some difficulty, whereas apparently there was a blood clot that traveled and almost caused a blackout one day while driving a truck. And I was able to get the truck parked and get myself home, whereas I was told by receptionists on the phone that I needed to get into a emergency room right away, and that I was probably on the verge of a stroke, and that looking at my history, that there was probably a blood clot from the biopsy that I had just had done a few days prior. So that was taken care of after spending 2 or 3 days in the hospital here at Christ Hospital. They took care of me pretty good. Once that was done and the results came back, like I said, they determined that my prostate gland was more than 50% cancerous, and that I would have to have some type of treatment, either radical surgery, prostate surgery, or radiation, or chemotherapy, depending on how things look within the next few days or so. And we elected to have surgery, which was performed by a machine, a Da Vinci surgical assistant, which I thought was pretty interesting within itself, that they could have a robot assist a surgeon. And because of this particular procedure, it allowed a few more advantages over the previous types of surgery that they performed for men and prostate cancer. Yeah, they had to remove my prostate gland. Okay, after after the radical prostatectomy, where they removed my prostate gland, it took several days before I got to the point where I could, get myself out of bed on my own, which was the only way they were going to let me out of there. They released me, and I went home with a list of things that I should do, mostly trying to walk, as much as I could, and eating properly and all, and my prescription painkillers. I'm not going to really fault them at it because I know people make mistakes, but one thing that was omitted from my script of different prescriptions was blood thinner. So 4 days after I was released and at home, I started getting weak, I started getting sick, and difficulty breathing. And me being the type of analytical person that I am, I grabbed my computer or my tablet and I started punching up symptoms and trying to find out what was going on, what the cause was, and found out through research that I was having blood clot issues with my lungs. I was actually experiencing, it's called a pulmonary embolism. And along with that, I also developed pneumonia in my lungs. So I had blood clots and pneumonia in my lungs 4 days after prostate surgery. And I called in, or I had my wife to make a call, and I was rushed into the hospital emergency room, where I eventually stayed for maybe 2 weeks or so to try and clear the blood clots. I was informed that because of the location of the prostate in relation to my bladder, that there was a small chance that all of the cancer cells may not have been removed, and that I would have to have extensive follow-ups to make sure that everything would be fine, which eventually we found out that it wasn't. Approximately a year or so went by. It was discovered that my PSA levels were once again rising or increasing, which meant that the cancer was either returning or had not been totally removed. It was suggested that more treatment be conducted, and at that point we decided we were going to do radiation treatment. So for the remaining cancer, I had to have radiation treatment every day for 5 days a week for about 3.5 to 4 months. There's a piece of equipment, I can't recall the name of it, but it probably pretty close to almost saving my life also. They would put you on a bed or like a gurney or so, and they would have this machine localize each area where they could direct the beams of laser, and it would eventually kill the cancer cells by pinpointing this exact location. And the procedure would only take maybe 10 minutes or so, and I did that every day or 5 days a week for about 4 months, and that pretty much did the cancer. Yeah.
So after your cancer experience, took on a new hobby.
After the cancer, and I tell you, it really opened my eyes to a lot of different things, mostly life. And life can be taken away from you just when you think everything is fine, you think you're fine, you may not be. And I express it to everyone that, you should learn more about yourself and take control of your health and your body. I learned about not so much drugs, but prescription drugs and how they can affect. I learned about natural healing through teas, herbs, dieting, proper exercise. But one of the even more positive things that I got from all of this was learning that I needed to do things for myself that I could get enjoyment from. Exercising my lungs with a plastic tube to help combat the blood clots led me to an instrument called a pan flute. And because I said, well, if I have to exercise my lungs, I'd like to make music at the same time, going back to my music background and study in high school and all. I started with a lot of interest in the pan flute, which to this day, I very seldom, if ever, leave home without a pan flute. If I ever have time, or if I needed to gather my thoughts to relax, I would pick up a pan flute. I learned so much more about drones. These drones all of a sudden came to light as I was recovering, and it allowed me time being off to study drones. I started out with a little small, what they call a quadcopter, four motors. And to me, this thing it was so fascinating that you can make something hover. I mean, I've always had in my mind that I like to see things fly or to defy the laws of gravity, as they say. And to have something that could fly and you can control it and pinpoint locations like that with so much stability just really, really consumed me, to the point where I want to learn everything there was about it. Not just so much as to how they fly and all, but I wanted to learn how to build drones with all the understanding and all of the features and all the different assets that can be gained from a drone. Actually, the framework only took me, I would say, maybe 45 minutes to actually frame up the first drone that I built. But actually getting all the other components together, I would say it probably took me about 6 months after that before I got it to the point where it could actually take off and fly. There were quite a few setbacks during the learning process. Like I said, I knew no one that was doing it at the time. It wasn't until after I completed building a couple drones that I started finding other guys and clubs that were doing the same thing. So there were quite a few days where I would just be totally frustrated trying to get certain components to work properly, flight controllers and all. And there were even several times where I thought I had everything set and ready to go, and I would plug in that great big old battery, and I would get nothing but green smoke. So there was quite a bit of a learning curve there with the couple drones that I started out with. But I loved every moment of it. I can't wait till the next time I can get a chance to do it again. There's 4 that I've built, and that's the other thing. They can tend to be a bit costly. You have to, if you're a working man with family like myself, you really have to watch it, because it can really get up there pretty good cost-wise. So you have to kind of spread them out a bit, the bills, as they get more complex. The more critical aspect and challenging would be, I believe, in the tuning, in the trimming, because if the drone or the airplane is not trimmed or doesn't fly properly, they're not aircraft. They're just conversation pieces that sit on the desk or something, but they have to fly. So to me, the most challenging portion of any of my builds is in the tuning, whether it's in tuning the motors or a motor on an airplane, or fine tuning a drone's PIDs, peripheral integral derivatives, in order to get that drone to fly with the stability and the maneuverability that you're looking for. How far can my drones and aircraft or airplanes fly? These days, my answer would have to be within the legal limits of the FAA space, which is 400 feet above ground level. So that is the highest that I set my drones to fly. A question people ask me all the time is, man, how far can that thing fly? Yeah, within legal limits. A few miles or so before, but nobody really flies airplanes that far unless they got a problem or they're looking for problems. For one, you know, if you have money invested in it, you want to make sure you can see where your money is. So if there was one thing that I could say that I would want to leave behind as far as knowledge for anyone, I would say the one thing that has always kind of been in the back of my mind is that knowledge. And you can gather knowledge from anyone, anybody, anywhere, whether it's a kid. I mean, you can learn from a baby. You can learn from 100, just like a person that's 110 years old. You can learn from anyone, but you have to start with an open mind, and that's always been one of my biggest things. Learn from anyone, anywhere, about anything and everything. And to not sound negative is, I'll say, not to be stupid, and that it's okay to be ignorant. Right now, I see myself as being ignorant when it comes to quite a few things in life, which mean I don't have full understanding of things. But to have understanding of things and not do what you should do to prosper, to be safe, is to be stupid when you know better and you continue to do things that are not smart.
What you got there?
This is the flight controller that I decided to go along with the hexacopter, along with several other aircraft. We were talking about challenges during the construction of aircraft and drones, and this, I would say, was probably one of my biggest challenges, was to get the radio program to perform the functions that I needed. It's equipped to do quite a few different things.
Loiter mode. Altitude hold.
With each one of these.
Loiter mode. Position hold. Stabilize mode. Drift mode. Gear up. Gear down. Return to launch.
Each one of these functions had to be individually programmed and fine-tuned, and I would say this probably took me just as long or longer than it did for me to actually build the drone. But once I got a habit or a rhythm as to how things are supposed to be changed and adjusted, things went a lot smoother, and turned out this is one of my favorite radios now because of the functionality. It's excellent. This is the hexacopter, and powered by 6 motors, as you can see. It has folding propellers, so it's a little bit easier to store and transport with the folding propellers. It's powered. There's a battery in the rear there. It's a 6-cell system. It has a GPS. It also has Wi-Fi system. It has telemetry system. Inside you can see some of the internal components. GPS is the flight controller. The receiver from the transmitter. BEC, battery eliminator circuitry. It has audio video transmitter here, where I can send messages and video from the drone itself. Up front here is a second camera. This camera actually gives me kind of like a pilot's eye view of the position of the drone as it's flying. And I have that on programmed for this monitor. The camera here is actually transmitting signals from here to either my tablet or another monitor. Over here I have my telemetry module, and with this module I can send information to and from the drone from software that I have on my tablet or my laptop. Of course, all of the wiring involved. Here we have the main battery, the main flight battery.
How long does the battery last?
Actually, the most flight time that I kind of limit myself to is about 12 minutes. It's a 6-cell, 10,000 milliamp battery pack. I can go as large as a 20,000 milliamp battery pack on it to get a little bit more flight time. But because of the size, the weight, and the other components, the flight time is restricted to about 12 minutes. That's about what I'll allow in order to get the aircraft back home safely before the battery is totally depleted.
Now, how much does this weigh?
Somewhere around, I would say maybe 7 to 9 pounds or so. Right now, as it stands, with the gimbal and camera on, it's got quite a bit of weight on it.
Now, you can attach any camera to.
This particular gimbal is actually designed for the Canon Mark V cameras, and the lens also. But I have seen guys adapt different cameras to this particular gimbal. This is actually the first drone that I ever purchased from the Experimental Aircraft Association. They had a little booth, and the guy was flying it around. That was the first time I'd ever seen a drone, and I just fell in love with it. I bought it and took it home and broke a couple props on the walls in the house, and eventually learned how to control it. And that's my first one. And then there were several after that that I purchased. This was one of the first builds. Oh, I don't have the camera on it, but it's got a little gimbal on it. But this is one of the first ones that I built using just a basic frame. And from the frame, I just started adding components, just like I did with the larger one there later on. The flight controller, which is here, the receiver, and then the wiring for the power distribution. And it's a GPS unit, just like you have here. So it has a GPS and it has a compass. The motors, you select your own motors, whatever size motors it calls for to get it to do whatever you want it to do. Some larger, some smaller, but I went with something kind of in the middle. And then your electronic speed controllers to control from the brain of the unit to the motors. You use ESC, electronic speed controllers. And here we have the communications antenna and module, so that you can communicate with the flight controller. Okay, I'll just power it up here. Okay, when you power it up, you can see the camera initialize itself. And I programmed my transmitter with these side slides to control the gimbal. So I have yaw movement with the gimbal, and at the same time I can pan up and down, all the way down to 90 degrees down. 。
Now,
programming the gimbal was quite a bit of a challenge also. I was actually told by several guys on the internet that it wouldn't be possible to program this particular gimbal with this particular flight controller. So I kind of proved them wrong. It just takes a little head scratching and getting it wrong, getting it right. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Ready?
Dope.
In the release mode, you just simply hold them down. Actually, they have left hand and they have right hand flutes, which I didn't know at the time, you know. And I actually purchased my first flute, and it was a left hand flute, and I'm right handed. So it was like, you know, totally, but I learned just from that one that this was something that I kind of like, especially after, like I said, my condition with the cancer, having blood clots, and pneumonia in my lungs. I needed to exercise my lungs. So I found a videotape, or actually a CD in a dollar store with this guy, and he had a picture on the cover of this little flute. So for $1, and I like music, I'll grab it. You know, I'm not doing anything else but around the house trying to recover from this mess. I got that CD and I popped it in, and the music was, to me, it was beautiful. It was relaxing, and it was something that I wanted to do. So I bought my first flute, learned a few things with it, aperture and all. That is the position of your lips along the top of the flute. And from that point, I bought another flute, and that's when I started learning a bit more and exercising my lungs at the same time, getting healthy. And one thing led to another, and now I'm addicted. I'm hooked, you know. And that was one of the positive things that I got, other than my drones, I got from cancer, was pan flutes. Not very many people see or know very much about the pan flute. It's one of the oldest instruments in the world. I mean, there's been traces of pan flutes that go back to BC. 1,000 years BC, made out of bones, bird bones. They were making flutes that they could make music, and from there it just grew into what we have today. This one in particular, it's a tenor pan flute made by a company called Chiari, and this is my grand tenor, made by a company called Lupaca. And both of these are they're imported from Peru.